Welcome back to another episode of Vikings Latest. We had a very busy Thursday in Vikings news, so we're going to touch on all that. We had a bunch of general manager interviews get released, so we got new names thrown into the ring there. But first, we're going to start out with the big news from Thursday night. The Vikings finally signed Jauan Jennings, former 49ers receiver, to a 1 year, $8 million deal. Tom Pelissero of NFL Network said that the deal is worth up to $13 million in incentives. So the Vikings get a big body with Jennings, 6'3", about 200 pounds. Big receiver, has experience of the Kyle Shanahan offense. So he's going to be able to implement into this offense really, really well as a third option. Clear upgrade over not just the hole that the Vikings had at wide receiver three all offseason, but also an upgrade over Jalen Naylor, who served in the role over the past 2 seasons. Jauan Jennings, he's always been more productive than Naylor has been. In 2024, he had 77 receptions for 975 yards and 6 touchdowns in his best season. Last year, he had 55 catches, 643 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So Vikings get a very productive third receiver option. Jennings is probably he is a wide receiver too on most teams. So it's pretty impressive the Vikings have obviously Justin Jefferson, but then Jordan Addison, when he's able to stay on the field, he could be a wide receiver one option on some teams. And Jauan Jennings now could be a wide receiver two option on a lot of teams as well. And the Vikings have him as a third receiver, able to get him onto the field in multiple ways because he's good in run blocking. So you don't have to exactly be selling out that you don't have to be like telegraphing to the defense that you're running the ball with Jennings on the field, even though he is a good run blocker. You can still get him in and still have him be a reliable pass catcher. So back in 2013, the Vikings would put in Joe Webb at receiver, and when they would put Webb in, it was obvious they were going to be running the ball. And obviously, Jauan Jennings is a lot better than Joe Webb ever was as a receiver. But you know how it is. Sometimes when the starting receivers are out, it's like, oh, this is going to be a run because this guy is in. Even though Jennings is a third receiver, it's not like when Jalen Naylor was on the field that you're expecting a run. But with Jennings on the field, you can put him in for Jordan Addison in a two receiver set if you want to, without telegraphing a run. I guess that's my long winded way of saying that. Jauan Jennings, I looked through his PFF run blocking grades over the years. 83.5 run blocking grade in 2021, which is insane. Had a dip in 2022 with a 56.2 grade, but 77.2 in 2023 and 73.8 in 2024, and then a slightly below average last year. So the PFF metrics, they align with what you see on the field. There's a clip going around on X and Twitter where Jennings, he pushes I'm pretty sure it's Terrion Arnold out of Detroit. He pushes him through the back of the end zone and up until the wall in a block, kind of like that tenacity on top of just the run blocking prowess. So that will be very interesting. It Also, it was back to that price point that Jennings got. Vikings got for $8 million when he was projected at possibly $22 million going into free agency, and maybe Jennings got stuck on that. We heard that he might have been really stuck on a certain price point. He reportedly turned down an extension around $17 million per year before the 2025 season with the Niners. So he had a bit of a dip in production last year, which probably made the Niners really wary of bringing him back. And the Vikings just really held strong to what they wanted, able to get him pretty cheap. They fill probably the biggest hole on their roster at the moment at wide receiver three by getting somebody like Jennings, who is able to fill in seamlessly to an offense that he's pretty familiar with, because there are ties with Kevin O'Connell's system, with the Shanahan system. The Vikings hired Frank Smith, assistant head coach this year, but he served as offensive coordinator for the Dolphins the past 4 years under Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel used to work very closely with Kyle Shanahan. So that's how a lot of this kind of works out. This will be a pretty good fit, not just improving at a position, but like scheme fit wise. This should fit like a glove. I cannot wait to see how this works out for the Vikings with Jauan Jennings. So we're going to go back to the Jonathan Grenard trade because this kind of is an extension of that because a lot of people were upset with how the Jonathan Grenard trade worked out for the Vikings. The Vikings traded him on draft weekend for the 98th overall pick and then a 2027 third round pick. They weren't super happy with that return, but now with the Vikings getting Jauan Jennings, that's possible because of the money that they freed up from trading Grenard. That doesn't like show up in the trade transaction, but like Grenard, he signed 4 years, $100 million, and the Vikings weren't going to do that. I never thought they were going to do anything quite like that. And then just what his money would have been paid this year anyway. Vikings were so strapped, so close to the cap that they had to move on from him if they wanted to make a move for somebody like Jauan Jennings. And even though they moved on from Grenard and they still have a hole potentially at edge three, they're able to fill that need still because there is still money to be had there. So you move on from Grenard, you get a couple rookies in this year's draft, next year's draft, you get Jauan Jennings, you still might be able to add somebody like Joey Bosa, Jadeveon Clowney to the roster as well. That's even assuming that Jake Golday, Cincinnati linebacker drafted in the second round, that's assuming that he could even take edge three reps, edge reps. We talked about how he has that kind of Andrew Van Ginkel possibly flexibility to play not only middle linebacker but on the edge. So we'll see. But anyway, you move on from Grenard for more reasons than just that draft capital return. Because you've moved on from him, you are able to do this and sign Jennings, who is a scheme fit, an improvement at wide receiver 3 over what you've had in several seasons. I like the move completely. One other thing that we should touch on before we move on to general manager candidates for receiver. This does raise questions about Ty Felton's future. Felton was a third round pick last year. Hopefully, the Vikings' third round picks this year. Jacoby Thomas, who was picked with that pick from the Jonathan Grenard trade, safety out of Miami. Hopefully, he is able to contribute. Caleb Tiernan, tackle out of Northwestern, he could be a starter down the line. And then obviously, you're expecting next year's third rounder to be a solid contributor. Right now, Ty Felton, he was the Vikings' third round pick last year's draft in 2025, and he only had 3 catches for 25 yards. This sure seems to be a signal to me that he is not going to be taking a very big step. The Vikings are Jennings is probably like a third option as far as receivers go. I'm assuming that he's still going to be, sharing like actual third target reps with T.J. Hawkinson. So I just don't know where Ty Felton really fits in here. Felton was mostly relegated to special teams gunner last year. I'd like to see more improvement. I'd like to see him on the field. I'm not rooting for guys to fail for my favorite team, but it's not looking super great for Ty Felton. I don't think he's going to be a cut candidate, but not very good right now for Ty Felton. That doesn't make me feel really any worse about getting Jauan Jennings. I love the Jennings pick. Just makes me wonder about and it just goes on to highlight just how poor our drafting had been in the past several years. And hopefully the drafting gets better because we are set to potentially hire a new outside GM, and the Vikings got a lot more interviews set up on Thursday with several more names. We went over Terrence Gray, Bill's assistant GM, on Thursday's show. You can go back and look at that episode if you want a little bit of background on Terrence Gray and how he fits the Vikings. He has familiarity with the Vikings after working as a scout under Rick Spielman. But the Vikings added 5 more names yesterday. Rams assistant GM John McKay, he's got an interview with the Vikings. 49ers assistant GM RJ Gillen, Titans assistant GM Dave Ziegler, Chargers assistant GM Chad Alexander, and Seahawks assistant GM Nolan Teasley. These guys obviously all have a different background than Kwesi Dofamenta had. We talked about that in Thursday's show about how it's like, when a head coach gets fired, if he has like a defensive background, you go for somebody with an offensive background, or an offensive guy gets fired, you replace him with somebody defensive minded. It's like the Vikings are doing that with the GM search. Kwesi Dofamenta had like an economics background, analytics background, not much of a traditional scouting background. So now the Vikings are like, well, we're getting somebody who has that scouting background, personnel background, and like these guys are not just front office guys, they're all assistant GMs. Vikings have a pretty clear type of what they are looking for, it seems like. So very interesting to see these names. John McKay, he keeps coming up as a name because Kevin O'Connell worked with him back with the Rams when O'Connell was offensive coordinator there in 2020 and 2021. RJ Gillen, he's a little intriguing. 49ers haven't been known as a great drafting team either, but he spent time, or Kevin O'Connell, he spent time with Gillen back in 2016 when O'Connell was a special projects. That's just what his job title was. Special projects guy, coach, person for the 49ers. Overlaps with RJ Gillen's time with the Niners. RJ Gillen, he started there back in 2015. So a little familiarity there. This wouldn't be like a complete unknown either. But from what I have heard from my sources, the Vikings, the top guys here, the guys that stand above the rest among these names are Chad Alexander, John McKay, like we just talked about, and Terrence Gray, the Bills assistant GM, who we spoke about in Thursday's show. So I recommend watching Thursday's show if you want to know more about Terrence Gray. We'll deep dive some of these other candidates some more next week, but with the Jauan Jennings thing, it just a lot going on. So all these guys deserve a little bit more time so that we can get more of their background, how they overlap past relationships with the teams, with personnel in the Vikings organization as well. So how will these guys fit? What could a GM structure look like? There's been a lot of talk because Rob Brzezinski is still a candidate. He's been serving as interim GM since Kwesi got fired at the end of January. So Albert Breer, he weighed in from Sports Illustrated. He weighed in. He said if it was up to him, this isn't really breaking a lot of news, but he'd either make Brzezinski permanent GM, which has been floated around a lot, or he would do a Detroit Lions or LA Rams style structure where one of the guys is paired with Brzezinski. We talked about that on Thursday's show, where Brzezinski stays within the organization. He gets a promotion, but he's not like the acting GM. Vikings would still hire somebody else to be the GM, have like a power structure to where that guy kind of answers to Brzezinski, and then works with the input of Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores, who both heavily influence personnel decisions. So that makes me initially think that John McKay would get the job, not just because that's what my sources say, but just because we talked about, Alec Lewis talked about it, and we talked about this the other day, that the Vikings are looking for somebody who can mesh with Kevin O'Connell, mesh with Brian Flores, kind of share their vision. If those guys are going to have a lot of power, a lot of say in personnel moves, this GM has to be able to be open to that. Like I said, it's kind of opposite how it usually goes. Usually it's the general manager is hiring the coach. This time it's kind of the opposite. Like O'Connell isn't the one hiring the coach, but you had to make the GM kind of fit with O'Connell. So because he has a background with McKay, because McKay has that background with LA, much like how Albert Breer said, Rams or Lions style structure, makes me think McKay is kind of the guy here. It would be ironic, the guy that said he never wanted to go full Rams, Kwesi Dofamenta, could get, well, he was fired, and then he could be replaced by a Rams guy. if that 2022 infamous interview with the USA Today where he said never go full Rams after the Rams had just won the Super Bowl, and the Vikings not only hired the Rams offensive coordinator from that Super Bowl team, they also got Wes Phillips, among others, from that Rams staff. So it is kind of funny how this could come full circle, become kind of Rams East if the Vikings were to hire John McKay. So we'll kind of deep dive some of these guys more. We will get more into Turnkey ZRG, the search firm that has been assisting the Vikings and Wilfs during this GM search. But yesterday we just had so much news to cover, so we're just going to get all that big stuff out of the way today. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to the channel, Vikings Latest, I encourage you to do so. We'll be talking more about this GM search going into next week. We got rookie minicamp starting on Friday for the Vikings, so hopefully there's some positive news coming out of there that we can talk about on Monday as well. So I appreciate everybody that's tuned in today. Skol Vikings.